My name is Clara Bishop, and for most of my 30 years, I've found my greatest solace in the quiet, ordered world of books. As the head children's librarian at the Cedar Ridge Public Library, my life was measured in the hushed rustle of turning pages and the soft thud of returned stories. My sanctuary was a sun-drenched room filled with colorful beanbags and shelves that smelled of paper and possibility. It was a world I understood, a world where I felt competent and whole. That feeling, however, often dissolved like mist in the morning sun whenever I stepped into the world of my husband's family. Leo, my husband of 4 years, is the kind of man whose gentleness is both his most beautiful quality and his most profound weakness. His heart is a vast, open landscape, but it's a landscape he's terrified of seeing trampled. This fear, especially where his family was concerned, often left me feeling like I was standing on the other side of a chasm, calling out to him across a windy divide. He was in Ashworth, and in our corner of the Pacific Northwest, nestled against the steel-gray waters of Lake Washington, that name was a legacy. The Ashworths were not just wealthy, they were foundational. Harrison Ashworth, my father-in-law, had inherited a timber empire and, with a shrewd, almost predatory foresight, pivoted it into Ashworth Capital, a venture firm that now had its tendrils in half the tech startups in Seattle. He was a man carved from the region's granite, tall and unyielding, with eyes that assessed your value in a single, chilling glance. His presence made the air in a room feel thin. His wife, Vivian, was the perfect complement, a study in curated perfection. Her world was one of minimalist aesthetics, of artfully arranged succulents and clothing in muted tones of gray and cream. She moved through her life with a brittle grace, her approval a rare and fleeting commodity, often delivered with a subtle sting. "Clara, that's a lovely scarf," she once remarked, her fingers lightly touching the hand-knitted wool my mother had made me. So wonderfully rustic. Then there were Leo's siblings. Isabel, Maya's mother, was a beautiful, fragile boat adrift on the sea of the family fortune. At 36, she'd never had to navigate her own course, living in a stunning condo funded by a trust and flitting between gallery openings and yoga retreats. She'd had Maya in her late 20s with a musician who vanished back into the city's mist long before the baby was born. Isabel treated her daughter with a kind of bewildered detachment, as if Maya were a complex piece of art she'd acquired, but didn't quite know how to display. Julian, the eldest, was a sharp-suited lawyer, a younger, leaner echo of his father, whose primary function seemed to be nodding in agreement with Harrison and ensuring the family's legal fortifications were impregnable. He regarded me with a polite indifference that felt more dismissive than outright disdain. And then there was Leo, the youngest, forever caught in the gravitational pull of his family's expectations, trying desperately to keep his orbit from colliding with the small, quiet world we had built together. In that constant, gentle tug-of-war for his allegiance, I often felt my hands slipping from the rope. From the day Leo had slipped a simple, beautiful sapphire onto my finger, I was an anomaly in the Ashworth ecosystem. My parents were retired teachers who lived in a cozy bungalow in Portland. My life's work was in public service, a concept the Ashworths seemed to regard as a quaint, if financially baffling, hobby. Every family dinner at their sprawling Mercer Island estate was a masterclass in self-restraint. I learned to smile through Vivian's backhanded compliments and Harrison's pointed questions about the viability of a public library in the digital age. I did it for Leo, for the peace in his kind eyes. And then, there was Maya. According to the family, a profound and rare genetic disorder had stolen her voice and her mobility at birth. She lived in a silent, still world, shuttled between appointments with renowned specialists and cared for by a series of discreet, highly paid nurses. At family gatherings, I'd see her in a custom-built wheelchair, her small body still, her gaze fixed on something beyond the room. But I always felt a pull toward her, a flicker of something in her deep, dark eyes that felt like a secret waiting to be told. It was a spark of knowing, of an intelligence that seemed at odds with the blank slate the family presented to the world. I told myself it was just the librarian in me, always looking for a story where there wasn't one. The chain of events that would unravel everything began, as it so often did, with a call from Vivian. Her voice was as cool and smooth as the polished river stones in her Zen garden. She wasn't asking, she was informing. The family, all of them, including Isabel, was leaving for a 2-week chartered yacht tour of the Norwegian fjords. I would be staying at the estate to care for Maya. Clara, we'll need you to see to Maya while we're gone, she stated, the words leaving no room for discussion. A knot of resentment tightened in my stomach. What about her nurses? Doesn't she have her regular care team? We've had to let them go, she said with a dismissive sigh. There was an issue with reliability. Besides, this is what family is for. Leo has already said you would be happy to help. Of course he had. He had agreed without a single conversation, without a thought for my job, my life. When I found him in our small study, he wore the look I knew so well, a gentle, pleading apology. Clara, honey, they were in a bind. It's just for 10 days. Think of it as a little retreat. The house is beautiful. A retreat? Leo, I have a summer reading program to launch. I can't just disappear. It's the last week of the school year, and then it's a professional development week. I checked. And Dad said he could call the library board chair if there was any issue. He's a major benefactor of the new wing, you know. And there it was. The Ashworth solution. Any obstacle could be smoothed over with a phone call, a donation, a reminder of who held the power. I felt a familiar wave of helplessness wash over me. To refuse would be to ignite a firestorm Leo was not equipped to fight. And so, for him, I agreed. The day we moved into the guest suite of the Ashworth estate felt like arriving in a foreign country. The house was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all glass and cedar and clean lines, but it was a home with no warmth. It looked out over the slate-gray expanse of Lake Washington, the Seattle skyline a distant, glittering promise on the horizon. Isabel gave me a perfunctory tour of Maya's routine. Her meds are 3 times a day on the dot. They're all portioned out, she said, her focus more on selecting which cashmere wraps to pack than on her daughter. Don't skip them. She can get agitated. Agitated how? I pressed, a strange curiosity pricking at me. Just trust me. Stick to the schedule. She pushed a heavy, leather-bound binder into my hands. It's all in here. Feeding schedule, medication list, emergency numbers, not that you'll need them. It's all very stable. She added the last part with an odd, almost flippant, wave of her hand. Before I could ask what she meant, Harrison's voice boomed from the doorway. Clara, this is a significant responsibility. We are entrusting you with our granddaughter. See that you prove worthy of that trust. The next morning, their departure was a flurry of expensive luggage and brisk, impersonal farewells. The town cars idled in the long, sloping driveway. No one, not even Isabel, knelt to give Maya a proper hug or a whispered goodbye. She sat in her wheelchair by the vast picture window, a small, silent figure against the backdrop of the immense lake, ostensibly oblivious. Leo hugged me tightly as the drivers loaded the last of the bags. I'm sorry about this, Clara. Dad says there's a potential investor in Oslo he needs me to meet. You'll be all right? I just nodded, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest as I watched him get into the car. The heavy oak door clicked shut and the silence that descended was absolute. I was alone in this cold, beautiful prison with a child I didn't know, my own life placed on hold by the casual decree of a family that had never truly seen me. I turned to Maya's still form. Her eyes were fixed on the departing cars. Well, I sighed, my voice sounding small in the cavernous foyer. I guess it's you and me, kiddo. I had no idea that in that moment, the story of my life was about to be irrevocably rewritten. After the profound silence of the house settled around us, I wheeled Maya into the living room. The space was more like a gallery than a place for living, with its sculptural furniture and a single, dramatic painting on a vast white wall. As the binder instructed, I turned on the television to a channel playing gentle, animated shorts, the sound a small, tinny intrusion into the quiet. I talked to her as I settled her, my voice a soft monologue. I'm just going to get us some dinner started, Maya. The kitchen is right through here, so I won't be far. It felt important to speak to her as if she were present, to acknowledge the person inside the still body. To do otherwise felt like a kind of erasure. The binder, with its color-coded tabs and laminated pages, indicated it was nearly time for her evening medications. I headed into the kitchen, a gleaming expanse of stainless steel and dark quartz that looked as though it had never seen a spilled grain of flour. The Ashworths employed a private chef who was, conveniently, also on vacation. As I located the prepackaged nutritional formula and the small, labeled cups of pills, I decided to make myself a simple omelet. The rhythm of whisking eggs was soothing, a small piece of my own ordinary life in this extraordinary, sterile place. As the eggs set in the pan, a strange feeling crept over me, the distinct, prickling sensation of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a housekeeper I hadn't been told about. The sight that met my eyes caused the whisk to slip from my fingers and clatter to the slate floor. Maya was standing in the archway of the kitchen. Not in her wheelchair. Standing. Her legs were wobbly, and her small hand was pressed against the doorframe for balance, but she was on her own 2 feet. The setting sun streaming through the western-facing windows caught her in a halo of golden light, illuminating the dust motes dancing around her. Maya? The name was a breath, a whisper of disbelief. Then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, a little husky from disuse, but it was as clear as a bell. "They're trying to take my inheritance," she said, her words precise, carrying the faint, sweet lisp of a child her age. "Please, you have to help me." The kitchen seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white, sure that the stress had finally made me snap. The little girl, the silent, paralyzed child, had just walked and spoken a sentence that fractured my reality into 1,000 pieces. "Maya," I said again, my voice trembling. You can walk? And talk." She gave a small, jerky nod. Her eyes, those same intelligent eyes I'd always been drawn to, were now wide with a combination of terror and a desperate, shining hope. "Don't let them know I showed you," she pleaded. "They'll be angry. They'll hurt me again." Forgetting the omelet, I slid to the floor, crossing my legs to make myself smaller, less threatening. "Maya, I don't understand. Who will hurt you? What inheritance?" Her small face, so often a mask of placidity, crumpled with a pain that was years deep. "My mommy, and Grandpa Harrison, and Grandma Vivian. They make me sick so they can have my money when I turn 18. My mind struggled to catch up, to assemble this horrifying new information into a coherent picture. A whole family, my husband's family, conspiring to disable a child for money? It was the plot of a Gothic novel, too monstrous for the sun-drenched, modern world. "Come here," I said, my voice softer now. I patted the floor beside me. "Sit with me. Tell me everything." As the omelet burned in the pan, filling the air with the acrid smell of my forgotten dinner, Maya told me her story. Her other grandparents, the Finleys, her mother's former in-laws whom the Ashworths openly disdained for their new money status, had been killed in a plane crash 5 years ago. They had been the founders of Finley Organics, a beloved and wildly successful natural foods company. They had left Maya a trust of over $1 million to be managed by Isabel until Maya turned 18. "The medicine started after Nana and Papa Finley died," Maya explained, her small fingers twisting in the hem of her shirt. "It makes my brain feel fuzzy and my legs feel like noodles. When I told Mommy I didn't want to take it, she would lock me in the pantry. It's very dark in there." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "They told everyone I was born this way, but I remember. I remember running on the beach at their cabin. I remember singing songs with Nana." A wave of nausea washed over me. I could picture it all. The systematic drugging, the threats, the isolation, all to maintain a lie. She told me how she'd heard them talking when they thought she was asleep, discussing plans to have her declared legally incapacitated when she came of age, ensuring their control of her inheritance indefinitely. "How did you learn about the money?" I asked, my voice thick with a mixture of pity and awe. A flicker of pride, fierce and bright, lit up her face. "I taught myself to read better from the books you brought me. Mommy leaves her papers out in her study. I look at them when she's gone. I have a journal. I write it all down so I don't forget what's real. She took my hand, her small fingers a surprising anchor in my spinning world, and led me, her steps still a bit shaky, to her bedroom. It was a lovely room, with pale blue walls and a view of the lake, but it had the impersonal feel of a high-end hospital suite. From a loose floorboard beneath her bookshelf, she pulled out a worn floral print notebook and a sheaf of folded papers. The journal was filled with the careful, looping cursive of a child who had found literacy to be her only form of resistance. The entries were a heartbreaking chronicle of her secret life, overheard conversations, descriptions of how the sedatives made her feel, the threats used to enforce her silence. The documents were even more damning: a copy of the Finley Trust Agreement, statements from a private investment account showing a balance of nearly $1.5 million, and, most chillingly, draft letters to a psychiatrist outlining Maya's symptoms for an evaluation that would cement her status as mentally incompetent. I sat on the edge of her perfectly made bed, the evidence of a profound betrayal spread out before me. A cold, hard anger, an emotion I rarely allowed myself to feel, began to solidify in my chest. "Why now, Maya?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why risk telling me?" Her eyes, already filled with unshed tears, finally overflowed. "Because you talk to me," she whispered. "You look at me like I'm a real person." And she hesitated, taking a shaky breath. "They've never left me with just one person before. It's always two nurses, or one of them is here." I thought. I hoped. Maybe it would be different. Looking at this child, this small, brave soul who had survived years of unimaginable cruelty, I felt a shift deep within me. The part of me that had always deferred, that had always bitten her tongue for the sake of peace, fell silent. In its place, a new voice emerged, clear and resolute. "I will help you, Maya," I said, meeting her gaze. "I promise. We're going to make this right." The first light of dawn painted the lake in shades of rose and silver. I had barely slept, my mind a storm of disbelief and fury. At the kitchen table, I faced my first real test. The binder, that neat and tidy manual for a monstrous lie, dictated that it was time for Maya's morning medication. My hands trembled as I laid out the little cup of pills. Withholding medication from a child felt like a profound violation of trust. What if I was wrong? What if this was all some elaborate, tragic delusion on her part? But then I looked at Maya, who was watching me with an old, weary wisdom in her eyes, and I looked at the journal resting on the counter. My gut, a faculty I had long learned to ignore in the face of the Ashworth certitude, was screaming at me. I had to trust her. I had to trust myself. I went through the motions, crushing the pills and mixing them into the thick, vanilla-scented shake. But as I turned my back to get a glass of water, I poured the contents of the shaker down the drain and refilled it with the unadulterated formula. I handed it to her, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Here you go, sweetie." She drank it without a word, her eyes never leaving mine. The change in her over the next 12 hours was nothing short of miraculous. It was like watching a flower, long trapped in a dark room, finally turn its face to the sun. The fogginess in her eyes cleared. Her movements, once tentative and shaky, became more confident. The slight slur in her speech vanished, replaced by the bright, inquisitive chatter of a normal 8-year-old. "My head doesn't feel like it's full of cotton anymore," she said, her voice filled with wonder as she executed a slow, careful twirl in the middle of the living room. Emboldened, we began our own quiet investigation. Maya was our guide, a secret agent in her own home. "Grandpa Harrison keeps the really important papers in his study," she whispered, leading me to a room paneled in dark, gleaming cherry wood. "The key is in the big book about ships." Harrison's study was the command center of his empire. Unlike the rest of the house, it felt lived in, smelling of leather and old paper. The key was exactly where Maya had said it would be, tucked inside a heavy maritime atlas. The locked drawer of his desk yielded a folder that made my blood run cold. It was labeled M. Finley Trust. Inside was a web of deceit, meticulously documented. There were the original trust documents from the Finleys. There were letters between Harrison and his lawyer discussing strategies to mitigate the risk of Maya reaching maturity with her faculties intact. Most damning were the falsified medical reports from a private clinic that received substantial annual donations from Ashworth Capital and prescription records for powerful antipsychotics and sedatives, drugs that would, without a doubt, render a healthy child listless and seemingly disabled. "Look," Maya said, her small finger pointing to a document I'd almost missed. It was her original birth certificate and a file from her pediatrician for the first 3 years of her life. Page after page documented a happy, thriving baby who hit every developmental milestone early. Then, at age 3, the record stopped. The next entry in her medical history was a year later, from the Ashworth-funded clinic, diagnosing her with a rapidly degenerative neurological condition of unknown origin. It coincided perfectly with the death of her maternal grandparents. Our search took on a new urgency. In Maya's own bedroom, she pointed out tiny, nearly invisible cameras tucked into the corners of the ceiling. "They watch to make sure I'm being a good, quiet girl," she said, her voice flat. She was a prisoner under constant surveillance. She recounted horrors with a chilling matter-of-factness, Isabel pinching the soft skin on the inside of her arm if she so much as flinched when a loud noise occurred, Harrison visiting her room late at night, his large frame filling the doorway, reminding her what happened to little girls who told stories. "Grandma Vivian said I was their tragic angel," Maya told me as we sat cross-legged on the floor of the study, surrounded by incriminating paper. "She said my being sick made people admire the family for their strength. She said it was my contribution." A call from Vivian came that evening, a scheduled check-in. I retreated to the patio, the cool evening air a balm on my flushed skin. I painted a picture of seamless routine of a quiet, compliant child, while Maya stood just inside the glass door, a silent, anxious sentinel. "Remember, Clara, the routine is everything," Vivian's voice chirped through the phone. "Any disruption can cause a setback." "Of course," I said, my voice smooth as silk, while my free hand clenched into a fist. "Everything is proceeding exactly as planned." Later, we found Isabel's laptop. The password, as Maya guessed, was her own birthday. The emails between the family members were sickening. They complained about the expense of the nurses, the burden of maintaining the charade, and discussed in cold, clinical terms the legal steps for declaring Maya incompetent. One email from Harrison to Julian stood out. "The preliminary work with Judge Albright is done. He understands the sensitive nature of the situation. Once we have the formal evaluation, control of the trust will be secured indefinitely. Ensure Isabel keeps her daughter compliant until then. There is too much at stake." What exactly was at stake became clear when Maya showed me one last secret. Tucked into a hidden pocket in the lining of her wheelchair was a letter, its envelope soft with age. It was from her grandfather, Daniel Finley, written shortly before his death, intended for her on her 20th birthday. It had been accidentally included in the legal papers sent to Isabel. The letter revealed that the $1.5 million trust was just seed money. The Finleys, prescient and protective, had placed the bulk of their estate, their controlling shares in Finley Organics, worth an estimated $20 million, in a secondary trust. That trust would only transfer to Maya on her 20th birthday if, and only if, she had been deemed mentally competent and had assumed control of the initial, smaller trust. The Ashworths weren't just playing for a windfall. They were playing a long, cold, calculated game for a fortune. That night, I tucked Maya into bed in the guest room with me, far away from the prying electronic eyes in her own room. As I smoothed her hair back from her forehead, I felt a resolve as hard and unyielding as the granite of Harrison Ashworth himself. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming a stolen life. "We are going to fix this, Maya," I promised her, my voice fierce. "You are not their tragic angel. You are a phoenix. And you are going to rise." The following days were a delicate dance of discovery and documentation. With each passing hour that Maya was free from the fog of medication, she blossomed. A wry sense of humor emerged, along with a fierce curiosity about the world she had only been allowed to observe. We spent hours in the estate's library, a room the family rarely used. She devoured books with a hunger that touched my librarian soul. We discovered she was a brilliant strategist at checkers and had a surprisingly lovely, if hesitant, singing voice. We were forging a bond, a fragile alliance built on whispered secrets and shared hope. I knew, however, that hope was not a legal strategy. I made a call, stepping out onto the deck overlooking the lake, the sky a tapestry of gray and silver. My best friend from college, Sophie Chin, was one of the sharpest child advocacy lawyers in Seattle. Her office was downtown, in a restored brick building that felt a world away from the Ashworth's sterile mansion. I laid out the story, my voice low and urgent, half expecting her to think I was crazy. But Sophie listened, her silence punctuated only by sharp intakes of breath. "Clara, my God," she said when I finished. It's monstrous. It's called medical child abuse, and it's a felony. Combined with the financial fraud, they could go to prison for a very long time. But they're the Ashworths, Sophie. They have judges in their pocket. They have a whole floor of lawyers downtown. And we have the truth, she said, her voice firm, cutting through my fear. And we have a very brave little girl. You need to be careful. Document everything. Make digital copies. Don't confront them. Not yet. Let me put the pieces in place first. Her calm competence was a lifeline. Following her instructions, I used my phone to photograph every document, every journal entry, and uploaded them to a secure server Sophie created. We even found the central hub for the surveillance system in a utility closet, and, with Sophie's guidance over the phone, I was able to download the footage from the past month, footage that would show a perfectly healthy child being forced to act disabled. The hardest part was the daily calls from Leo. His voice, full of excitement about Oslo and fjords, felt like a betrayal. I knew I had to test him, to see where his loyalty would ultimately lie. During one call, while Maya was reading in the other room, I decided to plant a seed. "Leo," I began, trying to keep my voice casual. "It's strange, but I think Maya is doing a bit better. She seems more alert. I was wondering, do you think this medication is really necessary? It seems like a lot." The line went quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was tight with a familiar defensiveness. "Clara, please don't start. My parents have consulted the best doctors in the world. Her condition is complicated. Just stick to the binder. Don't try to play doctor. But I found some papers in Harrison's study about her trust fund. You are in my father's study?" His voice was sharp now, laced with alarm. "Clara, what is wrong with you? Those are private family matters. You are way out of line." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just conflict avoidance, it was willful blindness. He didn't want to know. He had chosen his side. "You're right," I said, my voice hollow. "I'm sorry. I'm just tired." I ended the call, a cold, painful certainty settling in my heart. I was alone in this. Me and Maya, against them all. My focus shifted entirely to her. I wasn't just her protector. I was her teacher, reintroducing her to a world she had been denied. We baked lopsided cookies in the vast, empty kitchen. We had whispered conversations in the sprawling garden, far from any hidden microphones. I taught her about her rights, about how no one, not even family, was allowed to hurt her or make her feel afraid. "The people who were supposed to protect you made a terrible mistake," I told her, our knees touching as we sat on the lawn, watching a ferry glide across the lake. "That is their failure, Maya. Not yours. You have done nothing but survive." The night before the Ashworths were due to return, the air in the house was thick with unspoken tension. We had our evidence. Sophie had a plan in place. But as we shared a bowl of strawberries, a simple pleasure Maya had never been allowed for fear of choking, she looked at me, her small face serious. "What if they win?" she whispered. "What if they make me go back to being the quiet girl?" I took her small hand in mine. It felt impossibly fragile. "They won't win," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "Because the truth is on our side now. And you are not alone anymore." I tucked her into bed, her arms wrapping around my neck in a fierce, desperate hug that spoke of years of untouched affection. Thank you for being different, she murmured into my shoulder. Always, I promised. I lay awake for hours, watching the moon's reflection shiver on the dark water of the lake, my mind replaying every possible scenario. I didn't know that the confrontation I was bracing for was only hours away, and it would arrive with the stealth of a thief in the night. At 2 in the morning, a sound jolted me from a light, uneasy sleep, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. My blood ran cold. I rushed to the window and saw the dark shape of a town car, its headlights off, gliding to a stop. They were back. A day early and in the dead of night. I flew to Maya's side, finding her already sitting bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with terror. They do this sometimes, she whispered, her body trembling. A surprise check. To make sure the nurses are following the rules. Okay, I said, my mind racing. Remember the plan, Maya. Be the quiet girl. Just for a little longer. No matter what, I am right here. I will not let them hurt you. I helped her back into her own sterile room, positioning her in the bed just as the front door opened with a soft click. I had just enough time to sit in the chair by her bed, a book open in my lap, when Isabel appeared in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim light of the hall. Clara? What are you doing up? She demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. I heard a noise. I was just checking on her, I said, my voice remarkably steady. You're home early. The weather in the North Sea was turning, she said dismissively, her eyes scanning the room, lingering on Maya's still form. Has she been all right? Did you stick to the schedule? Perfectly, I lied, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. She hasn't made a peep. Isabel seemed to relax, just a fraction. She moved to the bed, smoothed a hand over Maya's hair, and then turned to leave. I gave Maya's hand a reassuring squeeze under the covers and followed her downstairs. The entire family was assembled in the dim, cavernous living room, their faces pale and tired from travel. Harrison and Vivian were on the sofa, twin figures of icy authority. Julian paced restlessly by the unlit fireplace. And Leo stood by the window, his back to me, staring out at the dark lake. Clara, Harrison said, his voice a low rumble. I trust there have been no issues. None at all, I replied, my gaze meeting his without flinching. It was Vivian who threw the first stone. Isabel checked the medication cabinet, she said, her voice like chipping ice. It appears you've been careless with the dosage counts. Several are missing. Before I could respond, a sound from the top of the grand, floating staircase made every head turn. It was Maya. She stood at the top of the stairs, dressed in the jeans and sweater she'd been wearing earlier. She was holding the railing for support, but she was standing tall. She looked down at the 5 stunned faces, and her clear, small voice dropped into the silence like a stone into a still pond. Hello, Mommy. Hello, Grandpa, Grandma. She took a deliberate step down. I don't need the medicine anymore. The silence shattered. Isabel let out a strangled gasp. Julian swore under his breath. Vivian's hand flew to her perfectly composed throat. Harrison's face darkened to a thunderous shade of crimson as he rose to his feet, his full, menacing height directed at me. What have you done? I moved to the bottom of the stairs, placing myself between him and Maya. I haven't done anything, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. Except allow a healthy child to stop being poisoned. She's delirious. She needs her medication. Isabel shrieked, lunging for the stairs. No. Maya's voice was stronger now, fueled by adrenaline and a lifetime of suppressed rage. I won't take it. I know about the money. I know everything. The room fell silent again, a stunned, breathless vacuum. Clara, Harrison said, his voice dangerously low, my granddaughter is a very sick child. You have interfered with her medical care in a way that is both reckless and criminal. You will leave this house now. I'm not going anywhere, I said, holding my ground. And she's not sick. She's been your prisoner. I've read your files, Harrison. The ones in your study. I've seen the trust documents and the emails to your lawyer. I know about Judge Albright. I know about the $20 million inheritance from Finley Organics. With every statement, the color drained from their faces. Leo finally turned from the window, his face a mask of confusion and horror. Clara, what are you talking about? Vivian tried to salvage the situation, her voice taking on a tone of syrupy concern. Clara, dear, the stress has clearly been too much for you. You're hysterical. Why don't you and Leo go home? We'll handle this. Go home. My gaze locked with Leo's across the room. Your family has been systematically abusing a child for 5 years for money, Leo. There is no going home from that. Isabel, her face twisted with a desperate fury, made another rush for the stairs, a small bottle of pills in her hand. You're taking this right now. I blocked her path. Get away from her. Harrison grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. That's assault. Julian, call security. We'll have her removed for trespassing. I wouldn't do that, I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. Because my friend Sophie Chen has already contacted Child Protective Services and the Seattle Police. They have copies of everything. They were instructed to act if I didn't contact them by a pre-arranged time this morning. I held up the phone. You're too late. As if on cue, the distant wail of a siren grew closer, a harbinger of the world that was about to come crashing down around them. Harrison's grip on my arm loosened, his face a sudden, stark mask of calculation. The doorbell chimed, its polite, melodic sound a bizarre counterpoint to the raw tension in the room. Julian peeked through the blinds and his face went pale. It's the police. And there's a woman with them. When Harrison opened the door, it wasn't just 2 uniformed officers. It was Sophie, her expression calm and professional, and a stern-faced woman who introduced herself as a CPS investigator. Mr. Ashworth, Sophie said coolly. I'm counsel for Maya Finley. We have a court order to remove her from this home pending an investigation into long-term medical abuse and financial exploitation. What followed was not a shouting match, but a quiet, chilling unraveling. As the officers and the caseworker began to ask questions, Leo finally crossed the room to my side. He looked from his parents' stony faces to Isabel's crumbling facade, and then to the small, trembling, but resolute figure of his niece on the stairs. The carefully constructed walls of his denial were finally collapsing. He knelt down, his eyes level with Maya's. Maya, he said, his voice thick with a pain I had never heard before. Tell me. Have we been hurting you? Maya looked at me, and I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. She took a deep breath. They gave me medicine to make me quiet, she said, her voice clear and steady. They said if I ever told, they would send me to a place where I would be alone forever. The sound that escaped Leo's throat was one of pure anguish. He turned to his father. Is it true? He demanded, his voice cracking. All of it. Harrison, for the first time, seemed to falter. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. It was Isabel who broke completely. She sank to the floor in a heap of cashmere and tears. It was Dad's idea, she sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at Harrison. Ashworth Capital was in trouble 5 years ago. He said the Finley money would be a lifeline. He said it was the only way. He arranged it all. The doctors, the stories. I didn't know how to stop it. The confession hung in the air, stark and ugly. The officers exchanged a look. In the end, it wasn't a dramatic confrontation that brought them down. It was a quiet child on a staircase, a desperate mother on the floor, and the simple, undeniable weight of the truth. As the CPS worker gently led Maya, wrapped in a blanket, out to a waiting car, I moved to follow. Leo grabbed my hand. I'm coming with you, he said, his eyes filled with a shattering combination of shame and resolve. We walked out of that cold, beautiful house together, leaving the ruins of the Ashworth legacy behind us, and stepped into the uncertain dawn. The next 3 months were a blur of sterile hospital waiting rooms, quiet therapy offices, and tense legal meetings. The world of the Ashworths didn't just crumble, it detonated. Harrison and Isabel were charged with a litany of felonies. Faced with a mountain of evidence and his daughter's testimony, Harrison's usual tactics of intimidation and influence failed him. The story became a local sensation, the fall of a Seattle dynasty. Vivian, while avoiding criminal charges, became a social pariah, her curated world shattered. Julian was placed on indefinite leave from his law firm, his career tainted by the scandal. But my focus was elsewhere. It was on Maya, who was slowly, tentatively reclaiming her childhood. Doctors confirmed she was a perfectly healthy, resilient little girl. The road was not easy. There were nightmares and moments of profound anxiety. But there was also laughter, something I had never heard from her before. It was a sound like wind chimes, bright and clear. And there was Leo. We didn't pretend things were easy. His family's betrayal and his own willful blindness had carved a deep wound in our marriage. We started counseling, both together and separately. He had to learn to untangle his identity from his family's suffocating legacy, and I had to learn to trust him again. He cut all financial ties with his father, sold the flashy car his parents had bought him, and started a small consulting business from our spare bedroom. It was a humble beginning, but it was his. The court appointed a neutral guardian to oversee Maya's trusts and granted us temporary custody. We sold our condo in the city and bought a small, rambling craftsman house in a leafy neighborhood with a sprawling backyard and a tire swing. It was a home filled with mismatched furniture, secondhand books, and the smell of baking bread. It was a home filled with warmth. One cool autumn evening, about a year after that terrible night, the three of us drove out to the coast. The sky over the Pacific was a soft, bruised purple, and the waves crashed against the shore in a steady, calming rhythm. Maya, now a vibrant 9-year-old who chattered endlessly about school and her new best friend, ran along the wet sand, her laughter carried away by the salty wind. Leo came to stand beside me, slipping his hand into mine. His touch was no longer hesitant, but sure. "I was so afraid," he said quietly, his eyes on Maya. "Afraid of their disapproval of the conflict. I was so afraid of losing them that I almost lost myself. I almost lost you." "We found our way back," I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. He nodded, squeezing my hand. "You did. You found the way, Clara. You taught me what real strength looks like. It isn't loud or powerful. It's quiet and steady. It's the courage to stand up for what's right, even when you're standing alone." We watched as Maya, her face alight with pure, unadulterated joy, chased the waves as they retreated, her small form silhouetted against the vast, open horizon. She was no longer a prisoner of silence, no longer a tragic angel. She was just a girl, running free on a wide, endless beach. In that moment, I understood that this journey hadn't just been about saving Maya. It had also been about saving myself. I had found my own voice, a voice that was stronger and clearer than I had ever imagined. I had learned that true family isn't about the name you carry, but about the love you cultivate and the truth you are brave enough to defend. The road ahead was still long, a story with many chapters yet to be written. But as the sun dipped below the edge of the world, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we would be okay. We were finally writing our own story together.